Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join our webinar today, where Kevin Indig will show you how to forecast the ROI of SEO. So let's start with a short introduction. My name is Thomas. I'm a strategic consultant here at SimilarWeb. And here with me, I also have an amazing Kevin Indig, VP of SEO and Content at G2. It would actually be great if you could shortly introduce yourself to our audience and give a short background on what you do.
Sure, thank you, Thomas. So, hi everyone, joining you live from San Francisco, from the Golden Gate Bridge, and just joking, of course. I'm actually in Germany right now, visiting my family, flying back to the States on Saturday. And as Thomas mentioned, I'm the VP of SEO and Content at G2. We are a marketplace for B2B software, and my job is to bring buyers to that marketplace. I have about a 10-year history in SEO. Started over here in Germany on the agency side. Then came over to the US about 6 years ago, and most recently worked at a company called Atlassian. Some of you might have heard it, very strong SaaS player. And so within my history, I had a lot of exposure to different types of businesses, different types of companies. And I learned a lot about how SEO works for all these companies and these specific industries. And you'll see a couple of those lessons reflected and a couple of these patterns reoccur throughout the webinar. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. So I think the next part is I just want to make sure you guys know that you can submit the questions for our webinar using the question panel. As for us, it's really important that you submit them because that's one of the reasons we actually do this live. And then we'll try to answer them at the end of the webinar. And without further ado, Kevin, please show us how to estimate the return on investment on SEO.
Yes.
Let me just stop sharing, and if you can share your screen.
Absolutely, let's do this. So starting with the agenda, we are going to start with basic traffic projections and then venture into revenue models. These are the basic two components that you need when you want to forecast the return on investment from SEO. But then we're also going to look into best practices. We're going to look at two big brands and not only their average conversion rate and why their average conversion rate is so high and higher than others, but also what they do really well in the way that they get traffic and in the way that they translate that traffic into actual sales. So definitely stay tuned for number 3. And then, of course, if you have any questions, make sure to throw that into the Q&A panel, as Thomas already mentioned. So we'll start with basic traffic projections. Definitely recommend to pay attention to this because we are not going to stick around with the basics for too long. We're going to go a bit more advanced very, very quickly. So first of all, whenever I think about projecting SEO traffic, there are a couple of questions that I ask myself to narrow the scope further down. Right? One of the biggest problems that I see with those projections and one of the biggest issues people have is that it is very overwhelming in the beginning and it very quickly feels like a guess. And a guess is really hard to sell. But it can actually do a couple of things to help you get a better idea of the actual projection in the end. The first question you have to ask yourself is whether the projection is for a specific page type, like a category page or a product page, or whether we're talking about the whole site. Especially optimizations like site speed, for example, are classic cases that really apply to the whole site rather than just a single page type, most of the time at least. There are exceptions. And then also I want to ask myself, or I want to know, am I targeting specific keywords or a specific query syntax? And we talk about query syntax, the idea is basically keywords that follow the same pattern, like best shoes for men, best shoes for women, best tops for men, best tops for women, like they all follow the same pattern. And so they will be addressed by the same type of page, right? And if you have such a pattern, then the question is, do you make an optimization that targets a pattern, or are we talking about a single keyword, for example? And then the last question is, do I already get traffic from those keywords or from those page types? And can I project or estimate what the incremental impact of an optimization is? So if I know, for example, I get 100,000 visits from category pages per month, and I can roughly estimate that this optimization will lead to a 10% traffic increase, that also helps me to generally improve my projection and be more accurate in what I'm saying. Right, and ways to test this, for example, is to roll something out at a small scale. So sometimes you have the chance to roll something out on a single category or maybe 5 category pages, and then see what the incremental change is, and then project that on all other category pages. Right, so this is how I think about projecting traffic from SEO very generally. But then I also think about different, I almost want to say stages of projections. So we talked about keyword syntax or query syntax. We talked about things that impact the whole site. We talked about page types, single pages and single keywords. But I wanted to give you a rough idea of what optimizations apply to each of those, because it can be a bit nebulous, right? So what you see already is that there are basically 3 different groups on the optimization sides and how they impact different parts of a website. So something like backlinks, site speed, they tend to impact the whole site. And when we speak about backlinks, I'm mainly thinking about a backlink to the homepage, and then there's an effect where that page rank or that authority is being distributed by internal links. So that's why I have backlinks here. But then also things like UX improvements. Right? These are all things that you typically don't just roll out at small scale. You typically roll them. They have a bigger impact across the whole site. But then there are also things like page type and keyword syntax, or single pages and single keywords. They're very, very close. They're very similar. And this is where you see the common tactics and optimizations that are being recommended, like programmatic content on specific page types, internal link modules, also backlinks, and programmatic metadata. It could also be meta descriptions, not just meta titles. And then lastly, the same applies to single pages or keywords, just at a much, much smaller scale. Right? And this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the things that you can do or should do. This is more an example of how I think about these different impacts, because it's so crucial in helping you figure out how to make more accurate projections. Another thing that I'm often thinking about is kind of the first of 6 different steps that I typically follow when I project traffic. So it all has to start with certain keywords, right? We did have this progression in SEO from keywords to topics. But to simplify this whole process here, let's stick with keywords for a moment, and then we can abstract it to the next higher level. So the first step is always to identify a set of keywords. Can be 5, it can be 5,000, right? That doesn't have to be a limit. And the way to get to these keywords is that either you have strategic keywords, meaning you already know the topics and spaces that are interesting and important for a company, or you have a number of low-hanging fruit keywords that rank on the second page of Google that you want to bring up higher to the first page, or you look at what competitors rank for, right? These are like 3 basic starting points to identify your relevant keyword set. And one thing that I really enjoyed, or that I generally enjoy about using SimilarWeb, is that you can find those keywords within the keyword competition feature when you look at competitors, right? So if I compared CVS Walgreens here, and if I was CVS, then I could see how do I stack up against Walgreens and how do my keywords compare, and then I can export a set of relevant keywords that I want to go after. Or I can also filter for keywords that I don't rank for yet, that only Walgreens ranks for, and then I can export those keywords as well. So there are a couple of different angles, and keep in mind that SimilarWeb measures the traffic and not just the keyword planner search volume here. So these are typically more accurate and will make your projections also more accurate in the end. And then there is this concept that I call traffic TAM, and TAM stands for totally addressable market, or total addressable market. This is a term that actually comes from the startup world and looks at how big the opportunity for a startup is. But we can also think about it in terms of how big is the opportunity from an SEO perspective, and how much traffic would you get from all keywords that we defined in step 1. And so the basic idea of calculating traffic TAM is to basically say, how many searches are there a month, and how many can I get, right? Like what's my potential? Because when we talk about either search volume or impressions, we can never get 100% of them. Even if we rank number 1, even if we rank number 2, 3, and 4, there's only a fraction that we can get out of this. And this is the idea of traffic TAM. Right? Once again, here in SimilarWeb, there's actually this super elegant way that I learned about that I didn't know before, where you can create a keyword group. So you can just do keyword research, you define a group, and then you can look at the search visits for that specific keyword group. And that is your traffic TAM, because the visits already tell you how many possible clicks there are for that group of keyword. And I found that to be the quickest and most efficient way to get to that number. And then we already have an outlook, right? Like that is, in many cases, that is already very powerful, especially for in-house SEOs or when talking to clients, because you can already give them an idea of the opportunity, right? Like how big, what are we talking about? Are we talking about 3,000 visits, 30,000, or 300,000? And then the third step is to compile and gather your optimizations, right? So you know, okay, these are my keywords. This is how much traffic I can get for them. Now comes the meat and bones, where you think about how do you get that traffic. Typically, SEOs start with the tactics and recommendations and then work their way backwards. And this is one of the biggest mistakes or flaws that I see in this space and that I see people make. You first want to identify the opportunity, and then the keyword, or before that, the keywords you have to go after, and then only the third step, what you do to get after, to go after these keywords, right? And here I just added two, theoretical examples. You can optimize the meta titles on category pages, or improve largest contentful paint by 1 second. Like largest contentful paint is part of the core web vitals, which soon will become a ranking factor. But these are all hypothetical. I added a launch week, which is basically just an idea of when you want to ship that specific feature, and then how much additional traffic you expect from that optimization or from that recommendation. So the idea is step 3 is to get a catalog of recommendations, right? And then in many cases you have to talk to your developer team or to your customer about when to launch that. But when you know the opportunity and when you know how much you can roughly expect from a specific recommendation, it's very simple to prioritize and reshuffle that list. That's the thought behind step 3. And then is step 4, which is to project the traffic over the year. This is a screenshot from a template that I created, and it shows you the current traffic, which is purely hypothetical in black, the baseline forecast and the growth forecast. And so the idea behind baseline and growth forecast is that the baseline forecast would be the amount of traffic you get without doing anything, right? It's basically year over year flat. And then the growth forecast applies when you start to add certain optimizations on top, right? So when you think about the catalog that we defined before, and we have the launch week, then it's very easy to add that to this template and then say, okay, we have these different weeks across the year. We know what we're going to launch when, and then we can project the impact on traffic over the year with that baseline and growth forecast. And then, of course, we can also measure the current traffic against that forecast, right? This is another thing that you cannot forget, because you want to see how do you stack up against that forecast, and do you have to lower or increase the forecast for the rest of the year. And then step 5 is about different scenarios. When we talk about the growth forecast, right? Like when we know all the things that we want to do across the year or even just in the next quarter, I'm a big fan of providing different scenarios, right? You typically have a stakeholder like a client or like a boss or like some team in the company that you work with. And because there is a certain unpredictability in SEO, I typically provide a realistic, conservative, and optimistic scenario. Right? So obviously the realistic scenario is the one that I want to land on. The conservative scenario is the more or less worst case scenario, and then the optimistic one is if all the stars align and Google loves you and things go well. And then this also helps to manage expectations. Thomas, you had a comment.
Yeah. So do you have a specific ratio that you actually target for these, or is it changes all the time by different industry or SEO implementation?
Such a good question. I typically start with a very basic -10%, 0, and +10%. But then what I do is, depending on the site that I work with or the company that I work at, I look at how close am I. year over year, and then I get a bit smarter, right? So it also depends a little bit on how mature the company is in terms of SEO. So very fast growing startups, there's a lot more variability and volatility. And then with more mature companies, obviously, like the ranges are much smaller. So there is a little bit of a it depends answer here, but the straight answer is -10, +10, and 0. Cool. And then the last step, number 6, is also often forgotten, and that's when you have your projections and when everything is in order, and then when you actually ship, make sure that you report on the results, right? Don't hermit in and just keep those numbers for yourself. Share them with stakeholders in either way. If you're below the forecast, share it with people so that they can help you. If you're above, share your wins with the company or the clients, right? At the end of the year or at the end of the quarter, however long you want to forecast for, you also want to kind of do a little post-mortem and think about what did you learn, right? Keep in mind that all these projections and all these methods and concepts, they're starting points, but they're not the final answer. You have to apply your own brain juice and refine them over time for your company, for your industry, for yourself, for your clients. So, do a little write-up. What did you learn? What were your assumptions when you made the traffic projections and when you gave the recommendations? And that will set yourself up for success, even with a client, in the company, or even personally for yourself.
Do you have any advice to people who are afraid of reporting on bad results? Because whenever I worked in agencies, we trying to make everything look perfect and that we influence and everything grew and just like try and manipulate data as much as possible. And when it's bad, we just try to hide it in some way. Is there like some approach that you take when you position it in a certain way? Like, this is below what we forecasted, these are potential reasons, and we're working on, or anything else?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And to be candid, that's also something that I did at the beginning of my career. And then there was a situation where, somebody really smart was sitting on the other end and tore my reports apart, so I never wanted to have that experience again. And so I think there's a lot to be gained in the communication before you launch something, right? So to manage expectations and say, hey, these are projections and forecasts, but there's always a scenario where they can go overboard. Look at this year, right? Like all my forecasts, certainly in March and April, completely went out the window. And even now, it's hard to even forecast for a full year. Maybe it's like speaking of a full quarter. So that's one part, is managing the expectations. The other part is that when you work at a company or when you have a client, it's actually very similar, as in that even when the results are bad, it's barely ever just a responsibility of SEO, because SEO is such a like a meta layer, or like a set of principles that you apply to other things. There is always a collaborative effort or a joint effort, and so it's actually never just one person's or one team's responsibility. And by holding the reality in front of people, even though it's harsh, you give them a chance to support you and to help you out. So nobody likes to bear bad news. I certainly don't. But it can also be an opportunity to turn things around. And that's why, for example, I'm a fan of weekly forecast instead of monthly, because weekly is a smaller cadence. You can much faster see how you stack up against your forecast and then pivot accordingly. And then sometimes you miss the numbers of the year, and it happens, and it's very uncomfortable. But if the numbers look good, quote unquote, until end of the year, and then it turns out that they're actually not that good, that's a worse experience than coming around in the middle of the year and saying, hey, look, we're on the wrong trend, we're not going to achieve this, let's reforecast, or let's pivot, or let's do something about it.
No, I think you highlighting a great point is that even if you trying to fudge the numbers a bit, it's great maybe short term, but long term it's not going to work, and you might not be able to pivot correctly, you might not find the issue. And so yeah, I think it's a great long-term approach, and it's going to work a lot better for you, and you're going to be seen as a partner of a company and not just supplier as well.
Yes, it's absolutely right. In terms of the partner versus supplier, I also think there's a bit to be said about transparency of your recommendations. If that's all very clearly laid out, also in the beginning, you get buy-in from the client, excuse me, or from the stakeholder or your boss. And then, if those don't work out, it's not like you never said what you were going to do and what you thought, like, so what I'm basically trying to say is be transparent in your thought process and why you give those recommendations and how you project. And then, even when the news are bad, usually you don't fall as hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Cool. So much about the 6-step process. Now let's talk about SEO revenue models, because so far we've only talked about traffic projections. So how to think about these, how to think about the impact from traffic. So there are a couple of different ways. And this is why in the beginning I said that I had the luck and opportunity to be exposed to lots of different businesses and companies, because it helped me realize that SEO can be very, very different for different business models. But also that, there are different monetization models. There are different ways that businesses make money. And if we come with a cookie cutter approach as SEOs and try to project the revenue from SEO, that will not land well. I promise you that. So what I did is I looked over my experience over the last 10 years and how I typically worked on SEO revenue forecasting and projections. And I came up with some very basic formulas for different industries. Now, again, keep in mind, those are starting points. There are going to be a couple more factors when it comes to the monetization or to the revenue equation of your business. But these are going to be way better than the classic search volume times CPC. It's a starting point. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to bash that concept completely, but it doesn't go far enough, right? The value of a paid click on Google is not equal to the value of a conversion coming from SEO. That's important to keep in mind. So to quickly run you through these, for e-commerce, right? We typically have when we talk about revenue, we have a gross margin for a product, and we have an average conversion rate. Now, there are conversions on category pages, but in most times they actually happen on product pages. So we can, in most cases, very simply multiply the traffic with the average product conversion rate and the average product gross margin or revenue margin, if you will. You can equate that into profit if you want to, but the biggest point here is about revenue. And so e-commerce actually has the benefit that they can measure conversions pretty reliably and pretty well because customers buy on the site. There's typically no handoff where you have to fill out a form or something like that or talk to a person. You basically come to the site, you browse, and you buy. For marketplaces, and keep in mind that these are marketplaces not in the sense of e-commerce, like these are not the eBays and Amazons. These are marketplaces that connect supply and demand from a services perspective. So we're talking about the Airbnbs, the Ubers, and even maybe the Spotifys here. Even though I would cluster Spotify and subscription, let me take that back. So talking about the Airbnbs and the Ubers and marketplaces, and for them, it's much more about customer lifetime value. Now, the idea of customer lifetime value basically applies to any company, but it's not as helpful in, for example, e-commerce or enterprise sales as here in the marketplaces business. So what I typically do is I multiply the traffic, and when we're talking traffic, right, we're talking organic traffic, just want to make that clear. I multiply that with the average conversion rate and the average customer lifetime value, because these marketplaces tend to have several interactions with their customers. Just think about Uber, right? And if you would measure the value of a single conversion for somebody using Uber, that is not as helpful as a customer lifetime value. And then now the subscription businesses or SaaS businesses. So this is where Spotify would fall under. This is where Atlassian would fall under, Shopify, all these companies that have a monthly fee for a service. And this is also relatively straightforward. So it also take the average lifetime value here and multiply it with the conversion rate and traffic. Not sometimes, most of the time actually, SaaS and subscription businesses have different tiers, right? So when you sometimes even consumer subscription companies like Spotify have a yearly tier and a monthly tier, or like family packages. I try to not overcomplicate that, but if you work in a SaaS company and you have 3 different tiers and you want to make sure you calculate the ROI from SEO accurately, then you basically need 3 different equations here, and you need to get an understanding of how many customers on average go with which tier and then apply that to the total number of or to the total amount of revenue per year. And lastly, enterprise sales. That's the only one that's a bit more complicated, because with enterprise sales or any sales-driven company, marketing has more of a serving function, and sales is the organization that really brings this home. So here you want to think about the visitor to MQL rate. So how many people who come to your site actually become a marketing qualified lead, and also the rate of going from marketing qualified lead to an actual customer, and multiply that with the average deal size. That's how I think about it in terms of organic traffic here. So I hope that these 4 different formulas give you a bit of a better starting point and perspective on calculating the ROI from SEO for your specific industry. Moving on, I wanted to zoom in on some industry benchmarks. I'm pretty excited about those because that's the first time anybody hears about them. There was a cross-collaborative article between SimilarWeb and my blog, which is on kevin-indig.com, and we wrote this long article, and we mentioned some of these benchmarks, but we did not go into the best practices. So really quickly, when we talk about conversion rates here, these actually come from SimilarWeb themselves, where SimilarWeb is able to look at how many people checked out, and obviously how many people came to the site, and then pretty reliably establish what the actual conversion rate of a business is, and also what the average conversion rate in an industry is, right? So this is how you can imagine that. And there are certainly some outliers, which we're going to talk about in a second, but to actually get to the benchmarks. So these are the numbers that we found for the 5 different industries: marketplaces, fashion brands, fashion retailers, consumer brands, and retailers in general. So to quickly walk you through these numbers, the almost most important one is the average conversion rate per industry, right? Like we see a bit of variability here. You see, for example, that consumer brands on average have a much lower conversion rate than, for example, fashion brands, right? So fashion brands 4.75, consumer brands 1.61. Now, I also calculated the statistic median because I wanted to get a feeling for how much outliers distort the average. And most of the time it was relatively close. So you see marketplaces, fashion brands, it's not too far off, but then fashion retailers and consumer brands, there seems to be a bit more variability here. So that means there are some outliers that have an impact on the average. And you see that when you look at the lowest and highest examples. So this specifically is the brand with the lowest conversion rate within that specific industry, like marketplaces, and the one with the highest, right? And that gives us an understanding of the full range of the spectrum and what's possible. So we see that, for example, in the fashion retailers industry, there's some brands with outstanding conversion rates, like really high. And we're going to take a look at what makes them so special and what they do so well in just a second. But then you see that, for example, in consumer brands, conversion rates, it's really tough. Like there seems to be a lot of traffic, and not all of the traffic seems to convert. Now, keep in mind that the conversion rate itself does not say how much money is to be made in that industry, or how much a conversion or a sale is worth. That obviously depends on the brand itself, but I think these in itself are already very interesting, and you can use them for the equations that are provided before. So you can literally copy paste them over, and you have a really accurate starting point here.
Just a quick question to clarify for our audience. These are conversion rates for organic search, right? So when we're talking about organic search, these are actual conversion rates for organic search and not for all of the channels.
Really good addition. Thanks for adding that, Thomas. Absolutely.
Yeah, just to make sure everyone knows.
For sure. And then, what I've been super pumped about, the best practices actually here. So I picked out 3 best practices actually, and these are brands that appeared in this data analysis, and those are brands that have a specifically much higher conversion rate than their competitors, and we're going to dive into why that is the case. So the first one is Amazon. Like, how else could it be? Amazon has an average conversion rate of almost 8%, which I think when I look at my own behavior, it makes a ton of sense. And when I see it, how much I've been shopping on Amazon just the last couple of months. Just an
I have
absolute
the same thing. I don't even realize how much stuff I buy from there.
it's so bad. I had to delete the app from my phone because one-click shopping is just that's the death of me. So there goes the savings. But apart from that, I think so. First of all, to look at the traffic split, and I like doing that because you will see this as a pattern as well. Typically, brands with a high conversion rate have a high amount of direct traffic. And this is a result of a strong brand. So even though we look at the conversion rates from organic traffic, high share of direct traffic is a signal of a strong brand. And I saw some really strong correlations with strong brands and conversion rates. Second, obviously, Amazon, one of the largest sites in the world, completely dominates their space. Here's a comparison against Walmart and eBay. And obviously, Amazon is pretty far ahead. No wonder. And then we see a little bit of seasonality here as well, where in December, obviously is Christmas time and holiday time, and people buy stuff on Amazon. And then we also see a little uptick in March, April, and May. Like these are all my purchases. No, I'm just kidding. These are all the purchases from Corona, and people are staying at home, obviously. Now, to zoom in a little bit on not just the traffic, but also the conversion rate aspect here. One thing that I love about Amazon is that you find all the information on basically one page. This is all above the fold, right? And I could waste the rest of the time of the webinar just going through all the different pieces of information that they have here. But most importantly, you quickly see screenshots, videos, different models of the product you're buying, the ratings, and of course, whether it's in stock and what the price is. So they tick all the traditional conversion rate optimization marks, and I would say they're still a best practice in the space. You know, some people would say that these product pages are cluttered, but they work really, really, really well. And then there's also this kind of flywheel from reviews, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about Amazon reviews, not just because I work at a site that provides software reviews, but also because I noticed that I myself, I go to read Amazon reviews even if I don't buy from Amazon. That's how strong it is, and I think that has a bigger impact on conversions and their conversion rate than many people would say. So just that added value and that objective review, I think, is absolutely major for Amazon. And also the checkout process, super, super simple. I see on one page, I don't even have to scroll, right? It's also because they save my credit card and address data. But I can immediately see when I get the product, what the final price will be, when it's, whether it's delayed, whether I want to pay a bit more to get it faster. It's the most easy checkout experience probably that I've seen out there, and it's absolutely wonderful. So I think part of the conversion rates or the high conversion rates are certainly also how easy it is to check out with Amazon, not just with one-click shopping. That's another one for sure, but that's like best practice by far.
I completely agree. I think that's one of the main reasons I buy from Amazon. It's like easy checkout and easy returns, and you don't have to like even qualify why returning stuff.
Yes.
I think it's huge part of the high conversion rate.
Yes, you're so right. The return aspect also plays a big role because I know I don't have to keep the product. I know exactly when it's arriving, and I can even choose to get it a bit later if I want to, do some environmental friendly shipping. So just the simplicity of getting the product, knowing where it is, and being able to return it, that builds trust, right? And Amazon is a brand that is built on trust and built on three big pillars. It's like low prices, vast selection, and fast shipping, and that certainly pays off in conversion rate. Now, the next brand that I wanted to highlight is Tile. I wanted to offer something completely different. Tile is a consumer brand. They send you these little sensors that you can attach your keys to or put in your wallet in case you lose it. I lost my wallet a couple of months ago. It was not a fun experience. I definitely would buy a Tile. So I spent some extra time in that space and know about the worth. But Tile has an average conversion rate of 4.23%, which is really, really good. They also dominate their competitors' space. So when you look at brands like Chipolo or Tracker, traffic-wise, Tile is is very, very far ahead. It's not the same magnitude even. And we see a similar pattern here. So not all, look at the amount of organic search that Tile gets. You would expect a consumer brand of that size to get a lot of traffic from paid search or ads in general, maybe social because it is a sexy product. But no, they get pretty much the most traffic from organic search, and they also have this high share of brand traffic or direct traffic, which I spoke to earlier. Now, it's very easy to understand how Tile works. Now, it's not rocket science, but still, you want to get an idea of like how far away from the sensor do I have to be? You know, do I just have to put in my pocket? Do I have to change the batteries? And they do that a bit better than, for example, Tracker. And you know, not to bash the company here, but that is a very significant difference. The how it works section here on this side is not very detailed, not very good. It's not very informative, right? I also found that Tile is the only one of 3 competitors that allows you to compare products side by side. And this is the regular checkout experience. This is not a special compare page. This is what you see before you buy one of the products. And not only do you see you know, how the product you selected stacks up against the other products Tile offers, but also the price, and you see different packages here as well. So my story, and I don't know this for sure, but my story is that a lot of customers, when they see this, they might tend to buy a package, and they might tend to buy a more expensive product than they originally set out to, because they see, oh, I can get this cool rose glow special edition, you know, and it's not that much more expensive, or maybe not expensive at all, and then, you know, they make that choice, or maybe something else. And then also saw that there's no real competitor comparison that's being offered. So this is Chipotle, and you know, I don't see the price here on the product page, and I don't see there's a page with all products, but there's no real comparison where I can see them side by side. The checkout on Tile is I would say good. It's not as good as Amazon's, but I think it's good because you have everything on one page. You see exactly what kind of data you need to provide to check out, and you consistently see the price of the product as well. Whereas on Chipotle, you have these 4 different steps, right? You see this here, so it's a bit more difficult to understand how you know, what else is entailed in the checkout, and you know, what other information is about to come. And then the third brand that I wanted to touch on is the Gap Factory. So we had Amazon, which is a marketplace or e-commerce site, and we had Tile, which is a consumer brand, and then also wanted to offer a fashion brand here. And Gap Factory has a stunning conversion rate of over 10%, which at first I was like, how do they do that? But there is actually, there are some really good reasons. So first of all, keep in mind that Gap Factory is not the Gap itself. It's a almost like an outlet brand. Outlet brands work really well because they offer sales, right? You see it right here in the middle, up to 75% off. And then also keep in mind that we're going through recession, and it's an economically difficult time. So I don't have the hard data to prove this, but my story here is that more people revert to outlets and to promotions and sales because it's a very tough time right now. And so what I found interesting here in the traffic data is that that Gap's outlet brand gets almost as much traffic as J. Crew's main brand. So they're almost neck to neck, and you see that, you know, the Gap Factory gained a good bit here in September. I thought that was really, really interesting and very strong from the Gap Factory. We look at the search distribution. Once again, we see a lot from organic search, but most is actually coming from direct traffic. So once again, this is certainly being pushed by in-store ads, by other sorts of advertising. I could even see TV or radio advertising playing a role here, but the direct traffic is really, really strong. And then the second place is organic search. And yeah, I wanted to point out again, like how heavily discounted these products actually are. And this is why I think the conversion rate is so high. You see that some of the products here, they're pretty much half price. And that, of course, is a pretty strong value proposition in itself. They also do a couple of really cool, clever things. So one of them is that I think in general, the product pages are very clean, and they're easy to to scan. One thing that they also do, which I personally love, and I'm not the right target group here because my size is a bit larger here, but they first of all they scratch out the sizes that are not available anymore, so you don't get to this disappointing experience where you select a size and you're like, oh, they have this product, and then when you want to check out, they're like, oh, sorry, we don't have this product in this size anymore. But second, I thought this was so smart. Instead of providing the sizes here, they actually provide the years of the infant that this would be suitable for. So I think there is a bit more that went into the user experience here than it seems at first look. But of course, there's always, wherever you go on the Gap Factory, there's always a little disclaimer for the price cuts that they give you, whether it's up here, you know, where they tell you the basic price, or when they have promotions like 50% off across the board, you always get a feeling for how much money you save. They also have a very sleek checkout. I think this one was really interesting, where they show you how much more money you have to spend, or how big your order volume has to be in order to qualify for free shipping. I thought that was really smart. And then once again, they always show you the savings, right? They always tell you how much money you save, how much lower the price is, and that certainly has an impact on their conversion rate as well. And lastly, the checkout experience I think is okay. It's very basic, very simple. But one thing that they do is they ask you for your email address before you check out. And I think this is in part to send you promotions and sales, which fits so well to this business model. And even though I think that it introduces a little bit of friction to the checkout process, I also think that when you buy on an outlet site, that you are certainly interested in promotions and deals, and that you are already a little bit invested when you clicked on checkout, so you're more likely to actually fill in your email address, or it's maybe even in your interest here. And with that, yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that we wanted to cover. I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. So Thomas, if there's nothing to add, then I would say let's jump into the Q&A.
Yes, I think we can jump into Q&A. Let me see. So the first question was about projections, and the question was, someone was guessing that when you make projections, your goal is to rank for #1, and if the goal is to rank for #1 position, how do you know when to hit #1, and how do you calculate this into the projection?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so the way that I handle this is I typically compare against the #1 result, how I stack up in terms of site speed, backlink profile, and content. If I'm relatively new to this keyword and I haven't invested much, that's typically a reason for me to not shoot from a #1 immediately, but maybe for #3 or #5. But it also depends on where I'm starting at, right? So I, much rather than saying I'm going to be on #1, I often say, okay, I think that this optimization adds a 10% incremental to our current positions, and then I add that to my keyword set. So I would export all the keywords where I rank, where the competition ranks. I add a 10% improvement on my ranking positions, and then I round it to the next higher position, because you'll come out with decimal numbers, and that gives me an idea of where I'm going to rank. Now, if we're talking about, if you're already on position 2, and then we think about position 1, like obviously there is a ceiling, right? If you add a 50% incremental improvement to position #2, you cannot go better than #1. So there is a little bit of a limit.
So the way you look at it, a more percentage increase, and not like your chance of hitting #1, right?
Typically, yes. Like in rare cases, when I look at a single keyword or like a handful of keywords, that's when I can make a more confident projection and say this is the position that we're probably going to land on. But yes, as soon as we speak about larger scales, larger volumes of keywords, I look at the percentages.
Okay, no, that's great. So then we had another questions about tracking the conversions in the results, and where do we get this data for conversions for SEO? And I can answer probably this. So this is SimilarWeb data. So we actually track like a lot of website data on their traffic marketing channels, and we track everything to what people do on those sites as well to the conversion level. So we then identify what our conversion pages are, how many people visit them, and then we estimate how much of the organic traffic, how many people came from organic search, and how many of them converted. And then we get the conversion rate for a website, then we collect it into the industry. So that's where the numbers actually come from. So it's from SimilarWeb, platform, and our product. Then another question was, do you feel LTV projections have changed post-COVID?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I love that one. I would say yes. It is, for most companies, the quick answer is absolutely yes. I don't know a single company, when I think about it, that was not impacted by COVID in some way. Most companies, unfortunately, negatively, and then some positively, but there's also a lot of fluctuation. So right now I'm in Germany. We're very close to the second shutdown here. I'm not an expert by any means, but I could see that being possible for many different companies, which means that the economy goes through this kind of roller coaster where, there's a shutdown, and then people are concerned, and rightfully so, and they pull back their money and their investments, and companies might cancel their contracts, and then we recover a bit, and there's a bit more confidence, and then things turn around, and then there's another shutdown. So there's a lot of volatility, and I certainly think you should probably recalculate your LTV, as often as you possibly can. I would also resegment my customer group, not just by company size or by LTV, but also by how likely they are to be affected negatively by the by Corona, by the crisis. And then reproject LTV based on these different segments. That's obviously like a big bucket. There's way more to say about this than that, but the short answer is yes.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, but it depends which industry, how impacted. Like it can be, in some industry, it can be positively impacted, some of them negatively, and then it depends on your customer base as well and segmentation.
Yes.
That makes complete sense. And then another question we had, I think that was the last one really, and then how these organic conversion rates get calculated. So we already said it's based on the traffic. Then there was one more question about non-branded versus branded traffic. So when we look at the organic traffic, we see the total organic traffic. So how do you put that into projection? Because conversion rate will differ for non-branded and branded organic traffic.
Yeah, also very good question. I typically tend to take branded keywords out of my projections. What I do look sometimes, and I have a specific projection for that, are brand combination keywords. So something like G2 software reviews or Jira project management, or those kind of combinations. And I look at how many clicks I get from these keywords, not because I'm worried whether I rank number one or not, but it's a good indicator for whether more people search for these keywords. And that can have an impact on your SEO performance as well. But typically, I tend to take out brand keywords because they tend to distort click curves or projections altogether.
Okay. No, I think that's a great answer. And I think that's all from our questions. Yeah, I think this was a great webinar. Thanks a lot, Kevin. And please go to Kevin's website. Can you remind us what your website is to check more amazing blogs from you?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. It's kevin-indig.com. I also write a weekly newsletter called Tech Bound, which you'll just simply find by Googling Tech Bound or going to my site. And then, of course, if there are more questions, don't hesitate to reach out on Twitter, for example, to my account, to SimilarWeb. I'm sure you guys will be happy to forward some of the questions, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this. Thanks everyone for joining. Have an amazing day.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.